Resources of Taos County, which lists every mine in this area, and it'll tell you a little bit about it. So, Bob, we're going to let you tell a little bit about Moly Mine. And then he has a short film. It's only about, what, 10 minutes, did you say?
I think so.
And there's no sound to it. He's going to try to talk with it. But it's very, very interesting. So you have the floor, sir.
A lot of this, of course, has been touched on back in the early days. I think the first claims down there in Moly were staked in 1914. And it was Fay and Johnson. And
I remember Fay. And I remember that.
Jimmy Fay.
What about Wild Bill?
Bill who?
Yeah, claims down there.
That was before him.
Was it Wild Bill?
But Fay was the one I think that.
Jimmy Fay is the one that the Molybdenum Corporation bought the claims from.
Yeah.
And he bought a 1928 Dodge and coming back from Quest inebriated one night, turned it over down there and drowned in the Red River. My dad bought the old Dodge then when it went up for sale. And he sold our Model T to Cleve Horner in E-Town. Cleve drove that old Model T of ours back and forth to E-Town for, what, 20, 30 years? I don't know. Long time.
Well, they had they filed, I guess, at least as far as I know, they filed the first claims down there of what became MolyCorp. And there was a fellow by the name of Sargent that was in there. And he filed some claims in there along with Fay. And Sargent, somewhere or another, there was an RNS mining company. There was a predecessor, I believe, to Molybdenum Corporation. And because back in 1919, they had 40 some odd employees that were on the payroll. And that was before Molybdenum Corporation was ever formed. But Sargent had a lot to do with trying to work out, they were trying to find a use for this besides shoe polish. And he was instrumental in hiring a fella by the name of Marx Hirsch. It was a metallurgist back in New York. And to try to get Hirsch to develop some sort of a use for this black stuff that they had. And of course, when you look at it, it looks just like galena, like lead. You see the rock, and Bob or somebody brought a sample of it there. And, you can rub it, it just rubs off on your hand. And
Bob, what year was this?
well,
Prior to World War I?
yeah, it started out in 1914. And then, they were working in 1919. And I've got an old time book here that starts out in 1919, but it doesn't have anything, it doesn't tell the name of the mining company. But of course it has, it's employees, and like, Bob says they were, in fact, Bob did better than the mules, they were paying mules 60 cents a day down there.
They also used the burros to bring the ore down from the old Highline mine too, They had that string of burros that Marcelino Martinez had.
Yeah. Well, then in somewhere around 1919 was when they hired this Marx Hirsch, and they started, trying to put together a mine down there, and were serious about trying to find a use for this moly. They figured there had to be one. And Hirsch went back to Germany right after World War I, and he brought back a bunch of steel samples that from Germany, and he brought them back to this country, and he analyzed them, and he found out that the Germans were using moly as an alloy in the steel. So all of a sudden, you know, they were onto something. So they formed Molybdenum Corporation of America, and that was formed in 1921. And Marx Hirsch and several others that were involved in the company for many, many years were a part of that, you know, the original Molybdenum Corporation. And Mr. Carman, they brought Mr. Carman in. Now the story I heard was a little bit different than the one that Bob told, but Carman had been in mining a little bit. He was down in Mexico when he got run out during the revolution, and came up here. He might not have been down there very long, but he got run out and came up here to this country, and he went to work for MolyCorp. There, I would think they probably said, if you can get this mill running, we'll give you a job, permanent job. But they used, at first, as they said, they used the old mill as an old gold mill. It was there, at Junebug. And they hauled the ore up to that. And then in 1923, they built their own mill down there at the old Moly site. And
Well, that 23 was the year it went into full production down there, wasn't it?
yeah, there's
Because they had the mill ready to run in the winter of 22. There was no place for the miners or anybody to stay, so they just shut it down then till spring. That's what Carmen and them told me at least, and then Dad was, of course, helping. He got help to build the mill, and old man Creel and the boys, Bob Creel, built the flume, worked on the flume.
And it's kind of interesting that some of the people that were involved there, like in 1919 was Bert Phipps, who worked down there for the Molybdenum Corporation. 1920 was Walter Janney. And
Walter Janney hauled lots of the mine timbers and stuff.
did he?
Yeah, Yeah. Walter and Herbert.
But, well, there's a guy that made $1 a day. His name wasn't Bob. His name was Gus. But, and apparently Moly mine paid pretty good because some of them were drawing $3.75 a day back
That was a miner.
then.
That's what a miner got paid. The guy that ran the drilling machine.
Jack Munden, Bert Phipps,
Yeah.
Gus Halvey, Rapp, Thompson, Frank Riley.
Jack Munden started the Riverside Camp over here.
The ghost of Jack.
Riley's in here from Buffalo.
Is
Some of his stuff in there in this receipt book, Riley.
Albert Phipps. I don't know, was he a brother to?
That's Bert.
Oh.
That's Bert. Albert.
That's Bert.
Yeah, that's
Okay.
not Bert Phipps.
Okay. But, and here, in 1920, why they had a lot of people working. Well, Bernhardt's that were down there.
Bernhardt had the cabin down there at the mouth of the Sulphur Gulch there on a little flat place, and then he had to claim up Spring Gulch there, going up the mine up the Sulphur Gulch there before you got the blind zone, what they call Spring Gulch. Bernhardt had several claims in there.
But just a lot of these names. Marcelino Martinez looked like he went to work down there about 1922.
the wagons. He used to let us kids ride up on ore wagons to the mine, out to the ore bins up in Sulphur Gulch. And when they brought the wagons down, why, he had some shovels. We had to help shovel it out of the wagon into the ore bin so they could get it down to the mill. And they had, you got a picture of it, but anyway, the highway came up over the hill and the ore bin was on the low side. Commissary and office building was there on the left. And between those two was where we drove it in. Then they took a little ore car and raised the gates, and the ore would slide out. The bin had a slope at the bottom to it, would slide out into the ore car and take it around, dump it into the crusher at the mill. Then from the crusher, a conveyor belt took it over and dumped it into the hopper to the ball mill. When it came out of the ball mill, it was so fine it would go through a 300 mesh screen. And that's the concentrates in that little bottle that Judy set down there. That's what they shipped out, the refined ore came out of that rock. And that's the concentrates.
When did you start working for
54.
54?
It was already, its life was half over when I started.
When did I start?
Are there any records of what kind of production came out of those mines in the early days in terms of dollar and cents figures?
I'm sure there were, but I don't have them.
Before World War II, the entire output of this mill went to Antwerp, Germany. Sacks were labeled right down here. The sacks weighed about, well, somewhere between 80 and 100 pounds. Little sack about yay big around, about yay high. It was real heavy. And they labeled, use no hooks, Antwerp, Germany via New York. The entire output that they shipped.
And they were heavy. I loaded the most.
I helped pull them too.
Those old miners literally hand carved the ore out. They just followed the veins.
Yeah.
And some of those stopes were like 200 feet high by 150 feet long and only be about 3 feet wide, if you could imagine working in a space like that. One of my first projects they assigned me down there was to see if any of those old workings presented a hazard to the, well, when I was down there, it was a surface mine, an open pit mine, and they wanted to know if the workings presented a hazard to the trucks and shovels. And they had surveys of these workings, and if you could imagine taking a handful of earthworms and dropping on a bucket, and then somehow plotting the path that earthworm took through the bucket, well, that's the way those old tunnels wound around everywhere.
Yeah, they were.
And no, they didn't present a hazard to the trucks and shovels.
There were several hundred miles of tunnel down there.
Yeah, but they were all quite tiny.
And you take the old Z tunnel, the first part of Z went back 2,100 feet, right, to the first shaft. Then they put down a shaft 250 feet deep. They call it the 200-foot level because 50 foot of that was sump in the bottom where where the water would accumulate and they pumped the water out. If anything happened or the pump shut down, why there was a warning went out, and all the miners that was in the tunnels that went off from this shaft had to get out and get up because they would fill with water, and you had to get out. Then they went back another from that 200-foot level. They went back then another 1,800 feet, I believe, toward Goat Hill or something like that, and put down another 250-foot shaft. They call it the 500-foot level, and that's where the tunnel down Red River Canyon went in and connected with the 500-foot level to drain the water out, so they didn't have the problem pumping the water out up through the upper workings. And they also used it as a haul tunnel then to bring the ore out, so they didn't have to hoist it back up and take it out through Z tunnel. Right?
They put that in, I think, what, 41, 42?
Yeah. Well, no, that was before that because I worked in that tunnel down there, and well, it started out as a miner, and then Gwen put me on the electric mule or the electric motor, and that was all before World War II because when war was declared, I enlisted and quit, and we'd already gone back and they was sinking the shaft back in that tunnel.
Was it pretty hazardous to work in those tunnels back then?
Oh, to a certain extent, you had to watch where you timbered through the soft spots.
I went in the old Z tunnel, and a month after I was in there, it caved in. And they would talk about these raises, I don't know if it's true, but they had a raise they called the Big John raise. Well, that's where Big John
Those
fell.
raises and the ore would slide down a chute or down one of the old tunnels down, and there would be a bin there that would hold it. And that's why they use Z tunnel as a main haul tunnel, and they could raise the gates and slide the ore right out into the cars, and that's the one the mule rode a whole string of cars out where one person or one man could just push one car. And the tunnels always had a slope to them uphill so that the water would run out of the tunnel. And alongside of the track there was always a stream of water that would run out. It was drippy and wet.
How many years or how many times has the mine been shut down for various reasons since it was opened up?
I don't think it was ever 100% shut down until, till this last go around. It was always operating to some extent. Something was going on. But anyhow, a lot of the power for the mill was furnished by, they talked about the wooden flume. They took water out of the river. They ran it through a wooden flume that ran along the hillside down there and down through some pipes into the mill. And there was an old Pelton water wheel down there in the mill.
Turbine, wasn't it, encased in the big steel housing? Hit the turbine?
Yeah, maybe it was.
It hit the turbine out of those, the big pipes. They were 18 or 20-inch pipes, and they narrowed down to a 3-inch nozzle that went into the turbine down there in the bottom of the mill.
And I always heard that they hauled that wheel over from Twining.
Probably did.
And that old water wheel came from Twining. So, and the other engine that they had down there was an old Benz engine that came from Germany. That had been a ship engine. And they used the water wheel to get this flywheel turning on this Benz engine. And it was a diesel. And you lit it with a paper cartridge. It looked like a cigarette. And you lit this paper, you raised a little door, you threw that paper cartridge in there, and you hoped that it would fire off. and so most of the milling that was done in the early days was done during the summertime when they had the water power from the river. And of course there were a lot of people that lived there in the camp, but if we go take a quick look at this film, why it kind of starts out, I think, where Mr. Hirsch was going to Europe after the war, because the ship that they're on is a World War I ship and still has some of the guns that they had on there for submarines and whatnot. And then it it carries on and it probably runs through into the 20s, where they were hauling some ore out and like that. It's interesting. It just is.
And on the end of the shaft from that turbine, they had an electric generator.
Right.
And they generated their own electricity for the mill, the schoolhouse, the office, the bunkhouse, the boarding house, and then the three the mill superintendent and Mr. Epley's house and Mr. Carmen's house all had electricity.
I know us kids used to have to shovel coal to get warm in the morning. They didn't have any power generating that, did they?
No, and you didn't hardly use electric clock down there because there was no. It was hard to find 60 cycles. But why don't you go ahead and we'll try to explain that thing a little bit.
Can we get the neons off here? Good.
Now, that looks, that's the Red River up there, and that's the flume, I guess, is going down.
That was the head gate.
Yeah.
There's the
And they were building the flume and then the pipeline carried the water down towards the mill. And then coming back out on the other side. That was your way, your bit Paul was talking about. When they brought the ore down, came down out of the bottom of the bins into those hand cars. That was the old mill building. That mill was nothing but a mass of belt. You really had to watch where you were going. And then that was a ball mill. They had a crusher, and they ground the ore at the ball mill. There's a table with and the old cookhouse. They had a cookhouse there.
Yes.
And that, I'm sure, was taken up Sulphur Gulch.
What's the name?
And the road was too good at that time, you know. And they shipped the ore out of the Rosso up there. They used to bring their fuel oil in there.
That's impressive.
Yeah.
That's probably impressive.
That was going up Sulphur Gulch. And then some of the old mine operations that were up there in Sulphur Gulch. Yeah. They used to bring the ore down, you know, on burros and by wagon. That was probably Mr. Carmen's car there. That was probably and you know, they talked about those were the houses that they had when they first
10 houses we lived in first. And wooden sides and wooden floor with a 10 top.